On New Year's Eve 2022, Rita and Richard Zoshko were found shot to death in their home. The person of interest, their daughter, Michelle Zoshko, a person linked to a cult known as the Zizians, a religion that has been brought up in national attention known as Zizianism. In November 2022, a landlord in Vallejo, California was attacked by two cult members, Alexander Lethem and Emma Boranian, in which he was stabbed multiple times, blinded in one eye, and actually fended off and killed Emma Boranian in self-defense. 3 years later, he was stabbed on January 17, 2025, this year. A German national and a cult member, Olivia Bockholt, was killed in January 2025 in a shootout with border agents in Vermont near Canada. In this border scuffle, there was one more individual who lost their lives in relation to this cult. That person was David Malland, a U.S. Border Patrol agent killed on January 20th, 2025 during a traffic stop turned shootout. All these 6 deaths are tied together by one cult known as the Zizians and their leader, Jack Lasota. So you might be wondering why this is something that I'm interested in. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is absolutely a story that involves really talented people, supposedly. People who have had resumes in Google. A lot of people from the big tech industries out in San Francisco. People who have been engaged into a cult, completely separated from family to an extent, I believe, mentally. And in a situation, in a surprising turn of events, almost resembles something similar to what I read about, in relation to Charles Manson. To understand this cult, you have to look at their leadership, and that leader is Ziz. Now, this is a actual cult post written on a platform known as Void Goddess, our sacred lady of the winding fractal. To give you an idea of who Jack is, a quick background is written by them. So in 2012, as I first start reading up on EA and X-Risk, and starting to donate to Miri after I had first decided to side with Team Human, not Team Negative Utilitarian, which I saw in some ways as more aligned with Team Human, I respond to a public invitation to discuss how to make Outcomes to the Singleton better from Anna Salomon. I asked her whether I should try to alter course and do research, or continue a fork of my pre-existing life plans, earn to give as a computer engineer, but retrain and try to do research directly instead. And the time I was planning to go to grad school and had an irrational attachment to the idea, she sort of compromised and said, actually, I should go to grad school, find a startup co-founder, drop out, and earn to give via startups instead. Yeah, this person really wasn't interested in education. They decided to apply the cheat code right here. So yeah, you get kind of an idea of who Ziz is, ladies and gentlemen. They're a computer engineer who wanted to basically start up a company, cash out a bunch of money that way, but as you can imagine, there wasn't enough follow through there. When looking into the actual philosophy that Ziz has dug into, you can see mentions of, things like the Sith. For anybody that has no idea about what the Sith is, welcome to the world of Star Wars, which is exactly the kind of fiction we're digging into to base all of our life work off of. The Sith do what they want deep down. They remove all obstructions to that and express their true values. All obstruction is what is within flowing to without. If you have a certain nature, this will straight turn you evil. That is a feature, not a bug. For whatever would turn every last person good is a thing that comes from outside people. For those who true volition is evil, the adoption of such is a practice, is a dirty trick that subverts and converts them. It serves a healthy mind for its immune system to fight against, contain, weaken, sandbox, meter the willpower of, that which comes from the outside. And of course, they didn't get into the whole way of the Jedi. But yeah, you can understand just by reading this blog the kind of insane shit that I've had to basically jump into to understand the Zizian cult. Now, much like the Zizians and their technological background, I also too use technology, and I found that, in fact, Ziz was also not just a talented cult leader, it seems, but also somebody that had a knack for making video games. For instance, a puzzle Metroidvania game for Mac, Linux, and Windows, known as Distheseum. And of course, the more you go down into it, it almost resembles a game known as Catherine. If you don't know it, it's an Atlas puzzle game. Far better than this dog shit. But of course, you go down and over here, and they've even got whole video gameplay for it. So yeah, it actually is a game that they were working on. But of course, did Ziz actually finish this game? Doesn't entirely seem so. It seems like this is where the game sort of plateaued in the year 2015, and they had much pressing concerns. So at this moment in time, it seems like Ziz has decided not to necessarily jump in and make a startup using their computer science degrees or their master education, or at least what they were going for, or follow through on their game. They decided at this point that the best, option was to actually go near, ladies and gentlemen, the Bay Area of San Francisco, where Silicon Valley is located and most of America's tech sector. Now, Jack Lasota, or Ziz, in November 13, 2019, on their actual blog, the Rationalist Fleet, decided to make this entire long post detailing their time basically going into the Bay Area Silicon Valley tech industry, and of course, at one point, building an entire residence on a boat, ladies and gentlemen. Now, at this moment in time, Lasota started ingratiating themselves, not in actually working and succeeding in the Bay Area, but actually deciding to jump down into the Rationalist movement. Now, the Rationalist movement, for anybody that doesn't know, there's, websites like lesswrong.com, which kind of touch upon the Rationalist movement. But for a quick idea, it's basically focused around things like rational thinking in the world of the tech industry. So basically, it's using reason and evidence to actually make things like, decisions in life, which doesn't sound really wrong or anything. Like, obviously, everybody should be using evidence and reasoning to make, proper decisions. I don't even think there needs to be a movement or an organization that you have to be a part of to just have basic human cohesion. But to understand the Zizian cult, which is basically a very fringe offshoot of this entire movement, basically started adopting things from, extreme veganism and basically getting this anarchist ideology, and eventually figuring out things like timeless decision theories and whatnot. Basically, the entire community of rationalists wanted to distance themselves because they found these people to be completely fucking unhinged. Okay, so enter the Rat Fleet, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this video uploaded a few years ago several years ago, from Alaska to Washington, was a video that showcased the Caleb, a World War II era vessel that was eventually going to be turned into a residence. Since, yes, living in San Francisco, and even if you wanted to Airbnb buy the cheapest options you can, it's still quite expensive. Prohibitively so. Now, obviously, Jack and a friend of theirs, Danielson, ended up living on a small sailboat from around Berkeley Marina, where they couldn't even figure out how to, again, pay those docking fees properly, right? They didn't even have any money at that situation. Money was effectively being burned, and really nobody was saving the world. And tensions actually grew up in this situation when Lasota had realized in her blog, or their blog or whatever, that Danielson may not be somebody that they could entirely resort to. They talked to themselves all the time, had ADHD and autism, which I guess grew the rift between them. And while throughout their process they were finding other people to live on these sailboats with, eventually other sailboats was purchased, like the Black Signet for $600, and eventually this all became the Rat Fleet. Point is, ultimately, at the end of all this, these ships were later abandoned. And with lawsuits starting from the San Mateo County to Danielson and the various owners, it ended up costing around $100,000 to get these eyesores out of the harbor and return some beauty to the actual landscape. So, of course, the cult here decided maybe living on boats wasn't the option. They moved inland. They moved to recreational vehicles. And that's when Curtis Lind, unfortunately, got involved into the story as a landowner that, decided to let these people rent. But wait, before we go to land, we have to talk about Jack's death. Apparently, Jack had an obituary posted. Apparently, Jack fell over the side of their boat, the Black Signet, and actually fell to their death. How do we know this is apparently a thing? Well, let's read their obituary. And of course, this was from September 7, 2022, published on the Daily News Miner. Jack Lasota left our lives, but not our hearts, on August 19th after a boating accident. Loving adventure, family and friends, music, blueberries, biking, computer games, and animals. You are missed. So there's whole comments over here too, right? Like, Jack, you're one of the age's visionary philosophers. Now, a few months after all this, it seemed that, our friend came back from the dead and ended up actually joining their polycule in Vallejo, California, when they started living on land in RVs. And effectively at this moment in time, Mr. Lind, who was our landowner from earlier, who unfortunately had lost their life in a mysterious quote-unquote accident or murder regarding or related to what the police believe with this cult, they were squatting, and I believe 2 days before the eviction, they had actually started attacking Mr. Lind. And while it started off as attacks, it unfortunately ended in someone's demise. Now, this is where, again, few people have been calling out this cult for what it actually is. Now, beyond all of this, there were situations where these people were protesting and they got the attention of law enforcement agencies. And when you looked closer at them, they obviously were a completely wild cult enamored by so much pop culture. I mean, the Star Wars stuff I talked about earlier in this video was no joke. There was a moment where literally the police had actually encountered these people believing they were shooters when they were dressed up like hooded figures resembling Emperor Palpatine or the Sith Empire from Star Wars. I mean, you really can't make this shit up. These people absolutely were enamored by pop culture, by veganism, by rationality, so to speak, when they were displaying the most irrational traits possible. Now, there wasn't a lot of people talking about this just around the internet. I did see a couple of posts on Poll, which is obviously 4chan's politically incorrect board. And of course, over here, the actual sentiment was just as much as what I had. The Zizian shit is bananas. And of course, when people were looking at Lesotho, obviously the general consensus was this person definitely puts the lotion on the skin. But of course, this led me to an actual Zizian.info page, which shed more light on the actual cult and their really fucked up methods of, being the next New Age Charlie Manson-esque cult. Now, the Zizians page by Apollo Mojave actually focuses entirely here. So the introduction of this works like this. Attendants of the 2019 CFAR alumni reunion were shocked to arrive at Camp Meeker only to be turned away by the police. The venue was occupied by 5 masked protesters in black robes. Surrounding them were several police cruisers, SWAT, and a helicopter, and the figures who were reportedly there to protest had made themselves seem too sinister. So yeah, again, these guys made themselves look like actual potential shooters, and obviously the cops are going to respond in an appropriate manner. So Ziz, the central character in the story, writes a blog, sincerely.fyi, which is what I showed you earlier in the beginning of the video. Sinceriously started out as a self-improvement column giving advice on motivation and habits. Over time, it became a platform for Ziz to discuss ethical and social theories. Before the Camp Meeker protest, Ziz was known for her Rationalist Fleet project. Rationalist Fleet was supposed to be a way to avoid paying high Bay Area rents by living on boats. The idea was that if you could extract people from paying rent, they could spend the time studying and still get access to the Bay Area network. As she tells it on Rationalist Fleet, did not go well. Having moved to the Bay Area so they could work on AI risk, the dysfunction of the Bay wore them down. Her posts became progressively more bitter over time, until the latest ones accused CFAR and Miri of sexual and financial crimes. So what is the purpose of this entire expose document? Well, apparently it's basically to count that there are 9 folks in the orbit still who endorse the ideas and keep mutual friendships, and the purpose of this document is to warn you not to join them. Ziz is a master manipulator, extremely skilled at selling people on nonsense ideas about decision theories and ethics that defy not just the rules of rationality, but basic common sense. Ziz is interested in AI risk researchers and approaches them under the guise of providing mental tech for people to build a singleton based on altruism. So again, to go down into here, some of the philosophies earlier on we talked about a little bit was functional decision theory. So the theoretical basis for the Zizian social conduct is functional decision theory, is designed as an answer to Newcomb-like problems where the actions of others are conditional on which decision theory an agent uses. In normal English, it's about situations where the environment will change depending on who you are. The classic example is a choice between 2 boxes full of money. The first box has as much money in it, but only if you're a sort of person who will take that box and leave the other behind. Functional decision theory says the solution to the problem is to choose a strategy which responds to the situation by only taking the first box. So in Zizian thought, this concept is expanded to justify behavior that would make a sovereign citizen blush. Zizians do not think it is ever valid to surrender. The reasoning goes that if someone is trying to extract a surrender from you, giving in is choosing a strategy that gets coerced into surrender. If you fight bitterly, you prevent the coercion in the first place by making it too costly to fight you. Or in some cases, it really seems like allegedly some people who are tied to this will lead people to actual death. Killing them will absolutely prevent any form of surrendering or any form of ownership over you. So here they go into talking about how Ziz's mind kind of works too. Ziz believes there are two kinds of core, good and non-good. Non-good cores are the most common, 95% of the population. A non-good core is one that only grants full agency when dealing with issues of self-survival and protecting offspring. That is enforced by a filter that only unlocks full agency when it detects those objects in a situation. Sometimes this filter breaks, producing a good core. Because people have two cores, there are three basic alignments: non-good, single good, and double good. Single good is 5% of the population, having one broken core which allows limited altruistic agency. Ziz seems to believe the probability of cores breaking its independent. That means the double good alignment only occurs in 1/4 of 1% of people. Look, I know at some point you're probably walking into this going, what the fuck is going on? And if you're actually responding that way, it's because we're looking at crazy cult indoctrination. So Zizians believe normal ideas about morality are mostly obfuscated nonsense, which makes sense. He says if humanity is honest with itself, it will eventually adopt uncompromising veganism. Zizian thinks arguments which don't acknowledge this are not about morality at all. They're about local struggles for power delaying the removal of an unjust status quo. This is a lot of the reason why they're so unhappy with Miri and CFAR. To them, their organizations waste their time on fake philosophy problems. In trying to figure out human values, they're not fighting philosophical difficulties, but rather their own cowardice and refusal to update on their poor moral practice. In the mind of a Zizian, liberalism means the same thing as it does for a communist or Nazi: an opportunity for decadence, vice, and corruption. Because we already know the correct moral policy is a ruthlessly enforced altruism towards all or almost all living creatures. So then they start to talk about like Roko's Basilisk, and here you can actually see like an idea of like their Discord groups where they're talking about this shit. So with the user known as Ratsby, Ziz is basically talking about, if I get the singleton, there will be retroactive justice. Fucking Nuremberg trials. It's just better timelessly. Roko's Basilisk, is that you? No. Roko says, I will torture you if you don't contribute. That is not justice. What is justice as a concept? I read your post, but really couldn't process it. It's a self-modifying meta-concept that optimizes timelessly for good. Timelessly, the correct punishment is the minimum that would convince the person not to do it. And the singleton can dole out rewards as well. The only crime I'd consider worthy of hell is unironically caving to the dark god's own would-be self-fulfilling religions, feeding the world to them to save yourself from hell. What's a dark god? Roko's Basilisk says, support God because he will torture you otherwise. Which god? Roko picked a shelling point. Cave to power. That's a dark god. Yeah, what no job will do to a motherfucker, let me tell you. Now, at this moment in time, they talk about actual cult tactics. So some of the cult tactics used are unhemispheric sleep. One of the tactics Ziz uses to manipulate people is unhemispheric sleep. UHS for short, unhemispheric sleep, is a form of sleep where only one half of the brain rests at a time. Normally, it is not possible for human beings to sleep with only one hemisphere. However, a weak form of UHS can be achieved by stimulating one half of the body and resting the other. Like hypnosis or fasting, this is a vulnerable psychological state for a person. Entering UHS requires a sleeper to be exhausted. It also has disorienting effects, so they are not quite themselves. The Zizian exploits this state to convince the unwary that they are actually two people. Ziz believes themselves to be double good, and almost without exception tells people she is recruiting that they are single good. So yeah, basically I assume half your body is sleeping, you're just like tingling the other side and letting the other side sleep. That's almost like a fucking weird stroke, to be honest with you. But of course, to go down over here, they give you an idea on how to perform unhemispheric sleep. But then they talk about things like the Maia Pasek. According to someone familiar with the matter, Ziz played a large role in the death of Maia Pasek, also known as Squirrel in Hell. Maia tried UHS as a way to gain awareness of her twin personhood, which Ziz calls debucketing. We're told these sessions were done with Ziz and involved telling Maia to focus on the suicidal impulses while in a disoriented state. Ziz briefly mentions this in her post, Good Group and Pasek's Doom, but skips over the details for obvious reasons. Supposedly, Maia began using UHS as an alternative to real sleep, and if you paid attention in the previous section, you know that that's a bad idea. Then, of course, what's the most common type of cult tactic is cutting off support networks. Ziz will tell people they're in the process of indoctrinating to get away from trusted family, friends, and lovers. Jay gives an example of this on her blog with the comment. Now, this blog unfortunately doesn't exist, but this comment reads, "It's still noteworthy that Ziz tried to break up a happy marriage, so like someone could spend less time being with a partner and more time trying to save the world. Doing that is a good way to get people to stop satisfying their values and in turn become less effective." And of course, then obviously jargon and loaded language. Ziz's enemies are known as vampires. So I guess Camden Gerard Davis actually is Ziz's. We might actually have like a Clash of the Titans here. The massive unenlightened humanity, zombies, nice folks who don't see things her way, single good, and the construction of good is particularly jarring. And of course, then it's the creation of a new identity. So the idea that every human being is actually two people is not just recognized as an abstract fact. Zizians encourage the adoption of a new identity alongside these lines. So the left hemisphere, right hemisphere to the brain, the Zalis and the Yanre respectively, they encourage new members to make significant and uncharacteristic lifestyle changes. So for instance, Ziz wears dark robes all the time, a preference which explains ill-fated decisions again with that early protest. But here's where they talk about, the people who were arrested in this protest were apparently all transgender women. So basically, it's not necessarily a coincidence to target transgender people. The general idea is, according to this post, is they're usually financially vulnerable, which makes sense. There's not a lot of money in the trans community to go around. Obviously, if you look at situations in regards to keffals and, plenty of the other individuals in this case, it's often in community that usually gets shunned from their families. And then, of course, they really don't have any money to go with. So obviously, for these people, they literally may be estranged from family, friends, they may lack stable housing, and sometimes they may not have access to social services. Then, of course, creating that new identity. During transition, people change their name, and that creates an opportunity for Ziz to jump in and basically give their new identity more of a cult-like peppering on top of it. So ultimately, what is known at the present is quite alarming. Ziz preaches a doctrine of radical high-tech veganism that promotes punishing your ideological enemies, not good, because that obviously bleeds into possible real-world violence, as we've seen in this situation, allegedly. And of course, she rejects the idea of niceness, community, and civilization. And most importantly, they use unethical tactics to onboard new members. So if you have somebody that is being groomed by someone like this on Discord or any social media to join the Zizian cult, stay far, far and away, because in reality, these people are literally just a cult, if that. And it's a cult that, has done some pretty serious things to have actual deaths and, killings tied to them. Now, obviously, look, Jack Lasota is an unhinged psychopath, okay? January 2023, in a booking photo provided by Pennsylvania, Jack literally refused to speak and basically wanted to be completely closed while being photographed when they were detained in this hotel. So yeah, this person is an unhinged nutjob psychopath, okay? And unfortunately, they've drawn in a bunch of other unhinged psychopaths that have taken this religion to an extreme end that has allegedly resulted in the deaths of people that realistically should be alive today. Unfortunately, they're not, because this weird techno-vegan trans religion has come in and basically fucked up the minds of people who were admittedly pretty vulnerable to start off with. Now, obviously, this video is kind of a touchy subject. This isn't your standard true crime fare. This is a situation that's very much actually ongoing. So I want to treat this with a level of respect, right? Obviously, people like Jack are, predatory. They're actual predators. And unfortunately, it's not just the people dying that are the victims, it's the people who are currently engaged in this weird cult who are also victims themselves. So realistically, I do hope those people get deprogrammed, because, a cult like this is being inside like the most fringe religion, or being inside like a terrorist group almost as a kid, or a criminal group that you join in as a kid. You get indoctrinated, and that indoctrination can stick with you for your entire life. And it's very, very difficult at times to take that indoctrination, deprogram people, and get them back to normality. But that's really the best case that you can hope for. Yeah, this is a wild story, ladies and gentlemen. I read about a border killing that people were using as some weird culture war fodder, and it ended up being an actual New Age Manson cult that is led by veganism, transgender ideology, very loosely, I would say. Because most of it is centered around, again, the idea of AI risk and Roko's Basilisk, truly unhinged shit all coming together, and with various pop culture references to Star Wars and plenty of other things that we've all grown up with. It's just led by one unhinged fuck clearly preying on other mentally ill individuals. So yeah, the Zizian cult. Not even once, ladies and gentlemen. Stay far away from that shit. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. Also, we have merch that is coming out. I've been kind of pushing this the last couple days. But we've got our hoodies, we've got our coffee mugs, and they're all over at someordinarygamers.store. Coming very soon. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're interested, check it out. Have a good time. This is me, Mutahar, and I am out.